Okay, Noel, you try now. Come to your honey. Two black? Two black. Yeah. So
sort of a humorous example of the post-digital world is the sort of idea of the Tea Party with bots, and this sort of a background for this is that in a few years ago, I think 2 years ago maybe, Twitter started deleting lots of this kind of bot accounts from their service, mostly after the sort of US elections and everything that was happening there, the sort of bots trying to create some kind of a change through the sort of a social media, and of course Facebook was probably the even more targeted platform, but due to the deleting of these accounts, and most of them were this kind of a far-right account that were sort of tweeting and sort of very far-right political ideologies, and if you would sort of tweet something with some kind of right word in it, they would respond to you and you could sort of discuss with them. And due to this, there was one US sort of a local newspaper where there was an angry sort of opinion, sort of a reader letter saying that accusing Twitter that they had deleted all of her friends from the Twitter, that this is not right. And then some journalists were interested in it and started sort of looking into it, and they noticed that she was a sort of a little bit older lady that was discussing with people on the internet, and she had really sort of far-right views on the world, on political world, and she was actually just discussing with lots of different kind of bots there about her views, and she didn't have any real friends. And then when Twitter started deleting these accounts, she lost all her friends, and they were talking about that she was having this kind of a tea party with bots. And in one way, I think this is a very interesting thing in that the digitality is sort of quite complexly intertwined between in our life that we don't always even notice how it is intertwined. That we don't know if we are discussing with bots. We don't know if how the algorithms are changing our lives and so on. And now we'll see if we get to the next slide soon. So we can continue from that.
The slides are visible in the stream.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
You can log into the stream. Okay.
No, it's in.
Okay, great. Almost. And maybe we can continue. We can see, you can see a short glimpse of the slide, so it's not really that important right now. Maybe. So from that we could sort of start thinking that one of the core changes of the digital and post-digital world is the sort of introduction of code into everything. And so most things we use have a snippet of code in them. And this code, of course, is not value-free, or it's not objective in any way, and it does not stem directly from the laws of physics or whatever. So it's a sort of a structure we have created. And so from there one could start seeing that this structure actually creates the architecture of the world we are using. It probably impossible to read, but so in the same way that Lawrence Lessig, who is a sort of a digital rights spokesperson and a professor in law in Harvard and I think Stanford now, was saying already in 90s that code is law. In a way, he was talking about the ideas that the way we use and structure and create the code also sort of structures the world we live in. So it's not sort of a thing that we could just think as a sort of a functional thing that we create this code to work, but we should also think about the sort of a political and ideological and cultural ramification of using that code. And then you could sort of start asking that is the code a sort of objective change of ones or zeros, or is it a power struggle between different kind of an actors and actors? And the idea here, what I want to sort of denote, is that the code is not sort of a simple idea, but it's in many ways politic, ideological, and cultural tools. And this was some kind of a sort of idea I was addressing in my dissertation. And from there, of course, the sort of a technological world has already changed. And then we'll get to the first part, which is the sheep. And this is sort of we can think about, maybe if you'll see it. Okay, it's okay. You can probably see there's a single sheep, and then there's this kind of maybe we have to wait. Okay, let's hope for the best.
I'm really sorry, Tomi.
Yeah, it's okay. Well, maybe it's this wire here.
No, because we get it to the computer for the stream, it works fine. So
Okay, so it has to be somewhere around there. Okay.
yesterday we had a session.
Yeah, you never know when. And it's a sort of a, with the HDMI and digital cables, when they don't work, they don't work. So it's a sort of pity. Excitement. So I think it works now. Okay, great. We can get back to the sheep. Almost, at least. Well, yeah. So we can think about this sheep here, or then this. Let's see, these sheep grazing on the last green side. These are the images from a project by Chris Valenzuela that uses sort of a well-known machine learning algorithms to create images from the text. This was online, I think a month ago, but now it's temporary offline. But hopefully it comes online, so you can actually go to the website and write any text, and it will create an image out of it. And then we have a little bit more sheep. Then we have a different kind of algorithm that tries to detect and DAC everything that you can see from the screen. And of course, as you can see, there's sheep there as well. And we can look at the other picture. There's also a green field with tags of sheep and stuff like that. And in the last one, we can also ask them, are there sheep jumping on my bed, or are there sheep relaxing in my living room? And the idea is that in a world of sort of a machine learning algorithms that process, act on, and evolve, and algorithms that we humans assume or are not even aware of, or take for granted for sort of a recognition, intelligence, and the world of possibilities shift and move between these different worlds. Code becomes something that has cognitive capabilities. This is not to say that code is conscious, but rather to denote the changed world machine learning imposes in a way that it can create algorithms that can act more sort of independently on each other. And let's go further. And we can, of course, use different kind of algorithms. And for a sort of a computational algorithm, everything is just a solvable problem in one way. It's an equation. And from a massive pool of data points, it manages to find an optimal path from point A to point B. And here you can see that the point from sheep to artificial intelligence is only 0.729 units, whatever those units are. However, the path from sheep to dominance is even less. Raskov calls this as a fractal noia, as finding links between everything, as an effort to impose an interpretation of one set of facts to another dissimilar set of facts. And then Hitostyle sees this sea of data as apophenia, to mistakenly perceive connection between unrelated things. She remarks how not seeing anything intelligible is actually the new normal, meaning that data that is being created is not meant for us, but to other machines. Huge percents of all the images that stream through the internet are never seen by human eyes, but by other algorithms that when they are processing them, they analyze them, categorize them, tag them, archive them, and in fact, sort of we and our life is being recorded by some CCTV camera in some city or being caught by tourist camera in the background, and it might end up being compartmentalized and archived, ready to be used if needed, or then it's used all the time to get us maybe to buy something more, to buy more ice cream or dampen our sort of growing anxiety. But what do these algorithms see when they see sheep? When do they tag a noise as a human face? Or do they see in the photo, which is in here, a photo leaked by Edward Snowden in the files that do they see drone bombing civilian targets when they can sort of open the image with the correct algorithm? And that's why we sort of need to talk about dogs. Earlier, we thought that digital technology, internet included, could give us a new chance of democracy and direct experience, that we would not be disturbed by gender, ethnic origin, or outlooks in general, and this would allow for a more genuine dialogue, which was depicted famously in Peter Steiner's illustration in New Yorker in '93, that in the internet nobody knows you're a dog. Now, of course, we know that this did not happen, unfortunately, but it's interesting to think that it's a sort of truth is in a sort of at least binary, if not more. That on the one hand, we know exactly who the other one is in the internet. We know it is a dog. We even know its breed. We know where it lives, what it eats, what's its favorite food, and when it goes out, and all the same information and more about the owner. But on the other hand, we also know that we cannot know. A random stranger on the internet could be anybody, anywhere. A nice guy in a chat room could be a friend pranking you or something much worse. The African oil heiress in your inbox is probably a scam artist. And even further, the person answering your support call is probably a machine, if not some underpaid worker in developing country. And here we can also think about the sort of, in the sort of age of machine algorithms, the sort of crisis on how do we trust goes even further. At how do we see what is real and what is wrong? How can we trust our sort of a visual cortex? How can we see the sort of realness in images, and how can we trust them? Or can we trust them at all anymore? Here's a sort of example website, whichfacesreal.com, where you can go on and look that and try out that do you actually see that which one of these faces are real. You can all think about for a few seconds which one is real, so I can then reveal it. So that one is the real image. There's two other ones, so you can a little bit have some practice. And this is the last one. And there's a sort of many interesting things going on there. There's some kind of feeling that most of the people get this right, at least. Even though they are really photorealistic pictures, you can still see that there's some kind of uncanniness in the digitally created images that don't really look real. And then there's also of course, this kind of technological things. You can start to look that, for example, the images created now by the machine learning algorithms probably have something wrong with the ears, because some of people have earrings and some have not. So, for example, in here, let's see, here you can see that there's something really strange going on with the earrings. Also, something really strange going on with that man's face there, because of course most sort of pictures that are being fed to the algorithms are only sort of one person. When there's more persons, they get it completely sort of wrong. But then there's also some kind of strangeness with eyes and eyebrows because of the glasses some people have and so on. So it doesn't really get it right all the time, but it sort of poses this kind of interesting phenomenon at how do we see and sort of categorize pictures in a way that sort of normal media education or media pedagogy doesn't really handle, at least not yet. And then we can sort of also think that when the data is gathered from the real us, the real physical us, how is then this data gathered? How is it used? What are the analyses behind them, and how does it analyze it? If you probably have heard that for example, in China they are using this kind of in few schools now, this kind of web cameras that detect the faces of students and then analyze the faces, that are they being attentive and how attentive they are they being bored and so on, and after a class teacher can look at which one was sleeping, which one was attentive based on the sort of algorithmic processes on the sort of a face. And of course this is interesting, that if we think about the sheep, that how do we categorize them? How does the algorithm recognize the faces? How does it recognize something being attentive? Or when we go to the more sort of complex concepts such as learning, how do we know that there's some kind of a correlation between learning and the face recognition algorithm? And sort of one thing that I've been studying in my work to sort of address this kind of whole different kind of a digitality, which is sort of embodied in our life in many different ways, is this sort of idea of a digigrasping, that the digitality is not only inside the devices, but it surrounds and affects our physical world. And from a different perspective, our physical actions create and form the digital world as well. And one of the sort of problems with this is digital embodied is the comprehension of the world. How are we able to perceive and understand the digital embodied processes, and when they happen in a sort of invisible level of abstract code that can be anything and altered anytime? What kind of knowledge is then required of the digital world? And for this, in one article, we sort of came up with this kind of a new concept, which is lending from Merleau-Ponty's idea of grasping, that we grasp something before we actually intellectually know it. We grasp something all the time. This could be also furthered into sort of Catherine Hales' talking about non-conscious cognition and how it is important for not only humans but other things as well. And these are sort of a very tricky questions, of course, as algorithmic processes in their material level do not seem to do much, at least to the human eye. Computer is just a warm brick of silicone and some other materials if we start to look at it, but it does not stop us from asking that how do these computational processes such as sort of AI algorithms then feel like? And from that we sort of developed different kind of modes, what you could sort of started discussing of the grasping of the digitality. It's sort of that it starts with a sort of a mode of ignorance, that it's just sort of being as given, that we don't really address and we are not at all interested in the problems or challenges of the digital world. And this is different as a sort of ignorance of sort of technological skills, and even sort of a technologically skilled person can be completely ignorant of the sort of a digital world, that he or she doesn't really are not really interested about the sort of challenges posed by it. And then from there, they are not really sort of a linear scale that then you go to the creating at the end, but you could see them sort of affecting all each other in a way. We can go to the awareness that we are being aware and start asking questions about it, and then at least in the sort of end, which we were talking about, is a sort of a creating, that when you start creating something with digital and physical processes, you start to mold that world into something different. In short, it's a sort of a concept of gaining knowledge from the digital world in a sort of embodied and hands-on way. And also it's a question of empowerment, which I was just shortly alluding to, that who is creating these processes and why are they created and who for they are created. We can start to maybe grasp these and then take some kind of power to our own hands and create something different. And we had some sort of examples in the article. And then also doing by hand can create a sort of ethical and aesthetical connection to the world, in the same way that in craft we can argue that doing by hand is important because you learn from the world in a completely different way, and you get this kind of a different relation to the material when you make by your hand. Then you could also argue that doing by hand in the digital realm also creates a sort of belonging and a sort of ethical connection to the digital world, and then you start sort of thinking more about what kind of software you use, how does that software feel like, what's the sort of aura of the software maybe. But let's switch gears and start talking about robots. And in particular, I want to talk about the making by hand aspects of robots, and something also building something robot-like, that something we are using in the teaching I'm making, and they are probably sort of very simple robots compared to robots you are doing here, but they maybe can tell us something about the digital and physical world. And in it, I'm sort of interested in the approach of creative coding, an aspect of sort of building a robot or starting with programming electronics and the like, with the sort of a more creative approach maybe. I don't know, creative is a quite difficult word, but creative coding is a sort of established term that could be used. That generally says that expression is more important than function, that we focus more on the what do we want to express and not that much that how is it done. If it's done with the sort of a spaghetti code and it works, it's okay. And the sort of alternative ways of using these technologies, and also misusing these technologies, doing electronics in a way that we know that this LED is going to burn out in a few hours, but it still works a few hours and it's okay. Sort of feeling the sort of limits of these kind of ways, and also finding out by hand. Here's the sort of a very simple sort of example as which I employ in creative coding as a teaching method. This is a example of one student's work in a media pedagogy course, where we only had few days to work with the sort of electronics and programming, and she made this kind of cookie dipping robot that's very simple, that you can press a button, you can have a cookie there, and then it dips the cookie into the milk, so you don't have to do it yourself. It's a very handy robot. And then there's also the question of sort of a materiality, that doing by hand emphasizes the material aspect of the digital, how the code is sort of moldable, how it can create these kind of different things, and how can you prototype quite fast with very basic things like cardboard and some other sort of cheap materials. Then the sort of another thing I'm doing is a sort of art and craft school roboty, which is a sort of maybe an afternoon school for children, a sort of a makerspace for children, which we started in 2012 when we were thinking that these kind of different kind of makerspaces are becoming more and more common and hackerspaces for adults, but there's nothing for children, that children could come and try these different kind of new manufacturing methods or assembling the different kind of digital things, or if there's sort of a digital tool gets broken, it's usually just thrown into the trash, but could you probably open it and hack it in some way and start learning from that. So it was a sort of a idea of empowering also children in this kind of a post-digital space. And so robot is this kind of foundation that we created that currently has 10 teachers and about 100 students in Espoo and Helsinki in Finland, and we have different kind of courses for families and for different kind of specialized needs groups, and then the sort of a main thing we are trying to do is a sort of a weekly courses in a way that students could come there with the age of 5 and continue weekly until they are 18 or something like that. So they could learn more and more about the technologies and sort of art and technology, and then sort of start from there and start thinking different kind of express these things and different kind of things. So when we started, we were really sort of interested in the sort of a maker culture and sort of this kind of a doing by hand, and when we have doing it more, we have maybe transitioned more in sort of a critical maker culture, sort of that also ask that why are we doing these things and how does this sort of affect the planet and so on. And then we have created lots of different kind of also publications. Unfortunately, they are all in Finnish, so if you know Finnish, you can download them. Otherwise, they might be a little bit difficult to read. Sort of free materials, and we have created this kind of creative coding toolbox for libraries in Finland that school can loan the sort of a toolbox, and it has everything you need to start creating these kind of stuffs. But as I was saying, besides robotics, I'm currently working in the university, and I'm mostly teaching art students that are interested in taking sort of a technology, programming, electronics in their work. But also we have a university-wide art studies, so engineering, programmer, physicist, economists, everyone in the whole university are actually required to take one art course. And right now I'm running one creative coding course where there's different kind of people, and it creates a really sort of interesting atmosphere to sort of learn from each other and finding the different kind of ways of expressing through these medias. Here's the one work from very simple short creative coding assignment I gave to them, that they need to sort of program their own kind of a timekeeping device, and instead of creating a normal clock in some way, he created this kind of a clock that actually instead of a normal clock, it changes based on the half-life of radioactive particles. So the color changes every time the half-life, the radioactive particles half. So what was it? In 500,000 years, the next color is going to come or something like that. So interactive, but in a different scale probably. And then the other sort of very simple example is the interactive assignment that just starts to sort of play with this kind of a different environments. How does environment sound can be created and transformed into digital? And this is sort of just when the voice gets too loud. I don't know why you cannot see it, but it gets the sort of face of the statue changes, and it gets this kind of ear plugs on its head, and it's a sort of an interactive piece you can try on. And then last, there's a sort of example in a one course we very briefly dabbled with some sort of a machine learning algorithms, and one of the students used this kind of a large database of ImageNet, which is a model trained already, and you can quite easily use it, and then created this kind of a program that tries to tell you that what does it see in the same way that sort of examples with the sheep did. And here you can see that dump can become a switch, or it can become a screwdriver, or it can be tagged as a sandal. And it's a sort of interesting and very simple experiment to seeing how does these different kind of algorithms think or categorize in some way. And sort of sum it up maybe in a creative coding is that, and also if we think about STEAM, I think that sort of one of the great things art can give is the sort of a more freedom to explore, that there's nothing that's done wrongly, or if it is the sort of thing that is being done wrong, can be really interesting and can lead to different kind of paths for the students and for the whole class. As in here, one of our teachers in robotics was saying that they created something where the code was completely wrong and it didn't work, and then they started going from there and get it something that was working, and it was nothing that he was intended on the course to happen, but then they got into the sort of a different kind of a place and different kind of a perspective to look at the code. And last, we can talk about vodka, and this is sort of a Finnish vodka here. So I want to also talk a little bit of sort of my artistic work in a way. I think it sort of may give you a better idea of the sort of research and my teaching. And in this work, which is called Fractal Noia, which has been shown up in different galleries, we had this kind of a very simple program where you could compare two data sets, and the interface was done so that there's six similar actually, these kind of vodka bottles, and you can place them on the tray, and then you could see these kind of graphs of the data that was sort of open data from the internet and compared them, and then the machine would create some kind of predictions, sort of calculations based on it, and ask that is this a coincidence? For example, in here it says that when the new marriages increases by 1,000, the amount of elderly women having trouble getting dressed decreases by 1.07% of age group 75 to 84-year-olds. And they ask, is it a coincidence? So it's a really sort of a humorous piece. And in some phases it also tells you about, we did one version in one exhibition in London, so we took the open data from the sort of a British government, and then it also told you who was the queen. It of course doesn't change that much, but also it asks also that who was the James Bond actor, and asked if that's a coincidence as well. And you could then play with that. And then another work is sort of which asks more about how do we sort of, if we think about the DG grasping, and how do we comprehend the machines and that have some kind of their own agency. And for this we created sort of a very simple drawing robot that you can create very easily, and then just gave it to sort of a few sensors, so it can sense the other one drawing there, and then it can decide that does it care about the other one drawing there, or does it just run over the other one. And we did this with the artist Matti Vainio, who is sort of doing lots of these kind of drawing performances where he draws other people, or then he draws by himself in a gallery, and he can draw for sort of a whole day. Once he, I think, drew something like 8 or 10 hours non-stop, and his sort of hand started shaking so much that he had to stop. And then we were thinking that who would win then? Could we create a robot that could draw even longer? And then this came out from that. And sort of thinking that how is it to sort of draw with a non-living thing, and how does it change our behavior when we are creating with that kind of a machine. And from that we are sort of continuing the process in a way that I created from that a sort of a very simple again, but the sort of EEG controlled robot that reads your EEG, and then by concentrating you can actually move the robot in different ways. And from here we are thinking that we could have this EEG on top of Matti, the visual artist, and we could have this kind of a swarm of robots he's controlling by his sort of thoughts. But it's also still in a prototype. And the sort of a last thing I want to talk about with the sort of artistic work, and also with the artistic research, is the sort of concept of artificial stupidity. And I think this is sort of a very fruitful concept when studying and sort of learning about AI. And commonly artificial stupidity refers to the AI that is not smart. In a similar way that the sheep in the picture in the first, they might be sort of artificial stupidity that of course it's not really a good photo of the sheep. And it's a sort of then the artificial stupidity depicts a sort of failed AI. But the sort of moreover, artist and researcher Michael O'Connell presents the idea that artificial stupidity can also be a means of creative unearthing, meaning that art has the ability to reject the dominant discourses and create new ones. And this is, of course, bears a similarity with Alva No's idea that art itself is a research practice. It's a way of investigating the world and ourselves, that in a way art displays us to ourselves and makes us anew by disrupting the habitual activities of our doing and making, and then getting us to stop somewhere and think about what does it mean. And for this I did a sort of a really quick sort of example or test with this kind of a machine learning algorithm. So I taught AI my dissertation with the idea that I don't have to write any more articles, that the AI can write it for me. And then you can have this kind of a seed word and choose the length of the text and choose the sort of a temperature, that how near it is to my own text, that how far does it go. And from there you just click the generate button and you get this kind of text, which you can see doesn't really make any sense, but because it's the only text it's learned was my dissertation, so it's probably not enough for the sort of intelligence, unfortunately. And to sort of end this talk, I asked it with the seed word of Linz, and you get this kind of a very poetic word of poem about Linz. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting, the different things that you are doing. So, any questions?
So it may be a sort of naive question, but